Whew. All right. That's what happens when you don't schedule things appropriately. Ooh. I think everything's good here. And we are going to do Skein stuff today. We're going to do specifically like handle image support for component data. Why is there a ping? Cool. So I kind of have this working already. And I'm thinking about just like workflow stuff at this point. For anybody who is coming into the stream later and doesn't know, Skein is a Bevy and Blender integration that allows you to add Bevy.org, I think is the site. Yeah. Bevy components to entities in Blender, and then those scenes go through GLTF. You spawn them inside of your Bevy app, and the component data is just kind of like there ready for you to go. So where's Blender? Do I have Blender open? I thought I had Blender open. There we go. We have Blender open. So the workflow there, make this a little bit bigger. Of course, this jumps to the other monitor. Why wouldn't it? The workflow there is like you have an entity, like a cube or something. It's got an object and a mesh, right? Object mesh. If we go to the object here, you can fetch your registry from your running Bevy app or something like that. Pick a component, which I have a test image here. Insert that component here, and then you get to play with the data down here. So like here's a test image. I'm going to choose Simple Explosion 7 because that's already in the project. And then we export this, which should work if I haven't broken anything overnight. And then I have to have my code editor with the relevant stuff over here. That always helps. And the GLTF file then has, save this to make it a little bit easier to look at, the images, the textures should also be in here unless I messed up the, are we in the right file? Yes, we're in the right file. There's a couple of drawbacks right now, workflow wise. One of them is that if you are going to work with an image like this, in Blender, there's the concept of images and textures. The extension is checkmark is using an ext Skein something something GLTF extension. Did you get the name for an extension accepted? I don't need to get the name for the extension accepted. I don't need to like approve, like get it submitted anywhere. The Bevy extension is already accepted, and this is a Bevy component extension. So I'm just using Bevy as the beginning. Even if I didn't do that, you actually don't need to get these accepted like to an organization. You can just make them. It doesn't like, it's not a requirement to have them like in an official registry or something. You only want to put them in the registry if you like want to prevent, I guess, other people from conflicting with the stuff that you're building. Or if it's like, you know, Kronos and I don't know, Godot decide to build an extension each, then they get KHR and Godot gets, I don't know, GDT or something like that. Maybe Godot. So Bevy has already submitted and been accepted for their like extension prefix. Chronos GLTF Chronos extension list. Vendor extensions. So KHR is Chronos, EXT is for like people who are collaborating on stuff. Apparently this vendor extensions link doesn't work. Annoying that those links aren't working. Here's the list of prefixes. So Bevy is in this list. Namespace prefix. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So Bevy has the prefix. So I'm using Bevy underscore Skein. That is like not going to be conflicted with anybody else unless they decide to like try to take over the Skein namespace, if that makes sense. So not too worried about that. Other companies have their own. Anybody that's building like in public and wants to distribute them has them. But like you don't need to be in this list. You can just use arbitrary strings. It's not like a requirement. It is just a thing, you know. So Bevy has a prefix. I'm using the Bevy prefix because this is kind of intended to be like a Bevy wide GLTF extension. Anybody should be able to produce a GLTF file with this data and thus benefit from the ability to have components inserted when the GLTF is loaded. Where was I? Will the Skein plugins support both through extras and extensions for some versions, and then extras will be deprecated? Yeah, I think that's how it's going to work in the long term. It's going to be hard to, deprecate extensions. I think what's going to happen is that they're both going to be supported indefinitely, and extensions is going to become the default. And if you want to use extras, you're going to have to go and configure it in the settings. The reason that extras is going to be hard to remove is that there's still people on like Bevy 0.15 who are using Skein, and they will always be permanently on extras. They will not be able to switch over to extensions, basically ever. Unless they update to at least Bevy 18, which is where the extension support for Bevy got introduced. So there's also other people who have applications on 16 and 17 who are going to stay on those versions. So the Blender add-on kind of has to support exporting to those models. And if people upgrade, then extensions is going to be like the new default, the new standard. But can't really break people. Where was I? I was going to, right, textures and images. Textures and images are different in all three. So we have three models, basically, like three data models. We have the Blender data model, we have the GLTF data model, and we have Bevy's data model. Blender's data model. I think I cover this in the PR actually, so I can just bring that up. This is also going to be the basis for light maps. Where is this? That's kind of scattered, so maybe not super helpful. But basically the TLDR is Blender has the concept of textures. If you go into, if I can scroll my menu here, come on. Shouldn't this scroll? There we go. If I create a new workspace here, let's call it, I don't know, layout. Let's go from this to texture node editor. Texture node editor, that sounds right? Like, sounds like what you should be using. And I forget how to get this to show up over here. Like all these are grayed out, which is really funny. But basically the TLDR is that like this texture node editor thing is like basically deprecated. World and line style are no longer supposed to be in this menu anymore. They're just here for legacy reasons. And brush is the only thing that's here. So the only thing that is actually a texture in the Blender sense seems to be these brushes, which is not helpful for us because that's not what we need. What we need in the GLTF and in Bevy, so Bevy's image at the end of the day, if I can hit the right keys on my keyboard, that would help. So Bevy's image is the image data, but also the image sampler. Everything else is kind of related to that, so we're just going to ignore those. But the idea is basically you have like image data, either data, URI, data in a file, a buffer view, something like that. And then the sampler is defining like what happens when you sample beyond the edges, what happens for the magnification and the minification, things like that. Okay, for the extension, it requires the Bevy PR for custom extension readers, right? You can't just backport the Bevy plugin to versions to also include extensions, right? Well, so technically speaking, if we wanted to support 15, 16, 17, I could release a version of that plugin. I would have to basically release a Bevy GLTF replacement crate is what I would have to do. I would have to fork the crate for those versions. I would have to release that crate for those versions compatible, and then tell people to disable Bevy GLTF and use this other crate instead. So theoretically, we could backport the extensions. It's possible. It doesn't seem super valuable. I think if somebody has like a production game that they're building, that they're shipping on Steam and like charging money for, and they wanted the extension support, we could talk about it. But I think for people who are like maybe just building a hobby project or something like that, they should really be upgrading. Basically, it's like it's work for a very small number of users. So if somebody's shipping like a production paid product, then sure, we can backport it. Technically speaking, that would be possible. Or they could do it themselves too. The code is all there too, right? They don't need me to do it to build that support in, because the way that Skein works is it's just a GLTF file with that data. So all you really need is the GLTF loader like extension for that PR that went out in 0.18 and some code to process it, which Skein already has. So yeah, you just make the updates for the version that you're on. The GLTF loader hasn't changed all that much either, so it's not terribly hard to do. But maintaining like a Bevy GLTF fork is something that I've actively tried to not do. So not really intending to do that. Where are we going here? To BSDF, principled. This does work without it, but for some reason, I don't remember what's in this blend file because this is from yesterday. Unless I'm not saving it into the right folder. Am I not saving this into the right folder? So the one problem with like expanding the UI is that these like, they don't wrap, so I don't really see where the URL is going. I think this is right overall. Let me, so basically what I'm showcasing here is that the workflow for making this happen is really awkward. So we have our image and our image is here and we've selected the image, which exists because we brought it in. But there's two problems with that. One of them is that the image is just the data, not the sampler. And the other one is that the only way to get a sampler really inside of Blender is to go create a material on some object and bring in that image. And then this will export as textures and a sampler, which is really annoying because then what you have to basically do is insert the component, which will then have nothing in it. You have to go create your new material, bring the image in, go back to your component, make sure you select the image that you just set up in the material. If this material isn't being used, then it won't export as well. So if we do export GLTF here, we should be able to find a material unused. So like 3 drop downs in, we can do prepare unused textures. And I don't know if that'll do anything to this particular file because we're using all the textures, but I feel like it's really strange that this is happening like this. Maybe that export is failing. No, export is working. Why is this image named image.png? That I don't know. Where is, do I have a terminal open? Yes, I do. So this is our Blender terminal, which gets pretty noisy. I also have a PR into the GLTF extension in Blender. Looks like it should be working. So that's what all these fixed JSONs are. All these fixed JSONs are basically like, right now, the GLTF extension in Blender will actually just strip marker components out. So I have a fork of that exporter that fixes that. That PR is up and in on the repo. The wrong repo, I think. This is the spec repo. This is the implementation repo of the exporter. So I have this in, which they say they're going to have a look at some point. And it's in the Blender 5.1 milestone. I have no idea. Well, I have some idea of when 5.1 is supposed to go out, but I have no idea when this is actually going to get, or when they're going to find the time to review it. But I feel like it's a reasonably understandable PR, or like small PR. So, hey Xavier, how's it going? So basically, TLDR is there's a lot of like little finicky stuff going on. Bevy really needs the image. And the image is basically a texture in GLTF terms. So we need the data and the sampler. And for some reason, this particular project is not doing what I thought it was supposed to be doing. So let me maybe... I have a theory, actually, about why that was happening. Not all images need to actually be loaded in Blender. So here's the whole process, right? We have the Bevy applications running on my other desktop. So we have our test image. Test image has a handle image in it. This can, like, we can take the render result, which is really the only default image that lives here, if we want to. But really what you have to do at the moment is create this plane, create a material for that plane, go to the shading, zoom out because it's way too far zoomed in, add a image texture, open the file, which, you know, go find your file, right? And then hook this up. Remember to go back to your other entity and grab the simple explosion and then export this GLTF into wherever it needs to go. In this case, it's not set up correctly, so we'll go to the right directory, set up our stuff, hit export, and now that's this file, which now has these images in it. And if we look at textures here, there's one texture here with a sampler and a source. The source points basically to images, more or less. So it's this image here, and the sampler points to samplers, which is somewhere in this file here. So this is our other sampler. It's got the mag filter and the min filter like we talked about. It should also have repeat if we had repeat settings and stuff. Yeah, that's what we're looking for. Game Dave Gary, hey, how's it going? You could just open an image in the image editor or add an open button in the Skein GUI. You can't. Yeah, so we have that already over here, right? Like this is, like we can create, I'm just in the texture paint, but like we can create this here, right? Image editor. We can create a new one here and whatnot. So let's call this like test image from, I don't know, image editor. So problems with this workflow. You have to set the width and the height ahead of time. So you have to know what file you're going to use. This is great if you're going to paint something in, if you know what you need. If this is like you use 1024 by 1024 textures, perfect, fine. For a bunch of other stuff, no. You have to pick some stuff here now. This is all fine and whatnot. And you can like paint on this and etc. And this technically will exist and you can find it here. You're correct. But when you export this to GLTF, we do not get another texture. Here's our image right here, right? Test image from image editor, right? .png. But we don't have another texture. So we don't have a sampler. Sure. I mean, it's the same thing, right? Like you're still not creating a sampler. Let's do Simple Explosion 8 because I think that's a new file. So this is some file, Simple Explosion 8. I think it's the end of the explosion. So it doesn't actually like, you know, have much. So you can open it. Again, we can go back. Here's Simple Explosion 8. We can export this with Simple Explosion 8. Go back, check. Here's Simple Explosion 8. We still don't have another texture. This is the problem. The problem is that we don't have a sampler for that image. The only way that I know of to get a sampler is to put it in that material with the image node. The only way that Blender allows you to define this sampler is with this node specifically, as far as I can tell. Weird UX, but not your fault. Yeah, for sure. So there's a number of workflow issues with this workflow right now. One is that you, so we can programmatically create materials that aren't on like objects on meshes and whatnot. But as a user, somebody who doesn't have access to or understand Python and how to do that, which is most people, they are going to have to create a material. To create a material using point and click in the Blender UI, you have to have some object. So that presents two issues. One is that you have to now create some other object to put your material on. The other is that if you do this a bunch of times, you end up with materials that you have to remember to click fake user on. Otherwise, they go away when you save and reopen, right? Assuming you get past that, you get to this point where you set this up. This does set up the sampler, right, for that image, but not if it's disconnected. So now it gets a little bit more confusing about whether you actually need principled BSDF or not. And we're not doing this for a material. We're doing this for a texture, right? We just want this texture. So that brings a whole other set of stuff working with the Python Blender. Technically speaking, all of this stuff is inside of a node tree, inside of a material, and we can go discover this specifically, right? If I go to scripting, I think it's what import bpy format in bpy.data.materials for trees in mat.nodetree. No, not for nodes, right? It would be nodes and node tree. For node in mat.nodetree. And here we'll just print node.name, I guess, because that seems like the simplest thing to do. And I run this, which shader node tree object is not iterable. Why is this not iterable? What is the, I have this in my PR over here too. What did I do yesterday? I did .nodes. So the node tree itself isn't iterable, but the nodes are iterable. So we run this. We actually can't see the console output inside of Blender for some reason. No idea why. But we can see it over here on the right-hand side in our terminal because I launched Blender from the terminal. Why this is the case, I really don't understand. But you can see that we can see everything inside of every material node tree in the Blender project. So really what we're looking for is this image texture. So we can go in here, we can find the image textures programmatically, et cetera, et cetera. So from here, I think we have two options. Because we need them to be textures and I want them to be user configurable, we can either put a sampler configuration in the UI for selecting the image and handle it ourselves, which is what I think I'm trying to do in the current code. So I've got some code that isn't finished here. Basically, this is a pointer property to an image to find the image. And for the sampler, we'll set up, I don't know, some property group with some stuff. I don't know if there is a type that we can use here. TBD. So we can either do that and have it right where you select the component. Layout object on the right object. So right here, we can have like the image and also the sampler configuration, which I think is the best option. I think if we are going to let people select arbitrary images, and also we need a sampler configuration, then putting that here makes the most sense. And then from there, I believe that we can do everything we need to do to get that data just directly from that component. The thing about it not being saved, it's not part of material. There is the fake user button. Yes, that's what I was saying earlier. Somebody who is creating a material and doing this repeatedly to get those texture samplers has to remember to click fake user on their own, which is just like an annoying like step, right? You have to both click fake user on those unused materials and also remember to click export unused materials or whatever the data include button for the GLTF export is. Both of those things have to be true. And even if you do that, then the thing that we need to do is actually figure out how to reference that exported texture, which is an open question as well. So I think the better option is, if we're going to do this, we can let people select images, which is the image data, and then we need to find a way to let them configure the sampler. And we put that right in the spot in the component where the handle to an image would normally be, which reduces the workflow down to basically insert your component, configure it here, which is the same thing you do every other time. And then if you want to modify that image or whatever, you can use any other part of Blender to construct or create that image, right? Like if you have a baker installed, which I have, I think a couple of them at this point. QBaker is one of them. So I could configure QBaker to do some kind of baking for me, light maps, whatever it is. Export that somewhere and then use that image, right? Configure my sampler and whatnot. UQ Paint, I don't think that's how you pronounce it. Maybe it is. I forget. Same thing though. This huge menace. Oh, ND, non-destructive. So on and so forth. You also have the Skein buttons. But I think putting it here with like letting people configure a sampler for this usage specifically is the right option. And then you can go into the texture painter or the baker or anything else. You could go, theoretically, you can go into geometry nodes and do like some SDF stuff in here and bake that out to a 3D texture and then put that into a handle image. This is one of the things that I want to do for fog volumes. Fog volumes is one of the things that I created an issue for fog volumes like a very long time ago, back when I like first shipped Skein. So this is an option handle image, right? So you would have to go into here, select some from the dropdown, pick your image, define your sampler, and then you would be able to get, theoretically, from geometry nodes, a rendered 3D texture from the density, like 3D density from SDFs or whatever. Put that into an image, send that along with Blender, like put it in your scene or whatever if you wanted to, and then apply it to that component. The weird part there is like, if you're putting this component onto an entity, then it will use that image, and you have to set up the sampler. But if you want to visualize it in any way, you also have to do that. And you kind of have to set that up yourself. Like if you want to see the density texture or whatever inside of Blender. So I don't know. There's some workflow stuff there too, but the geometry node stuff is pretty cool. And I think we can do that. We might have to write a little bit of code, but I think we can do that. So that leaves us with what I think is the right workflow. I think the right workflow is put the sampler information here next to the component and just let people select arbitrary images. I think that's the least confusing. Because if you do the material and texture stuff, then you have to like create a whole ton of materials. You have to understand how Blender works with materials. It's a lot more context that you need. Whereas with this, it's very much like, make sure that you have an image and then tell like Bevy how to use that image, which is significantly fewer steps. And I think that anybody will be able to create, like just create an image, right? I think also images are subject to the user thing as well, right? I don't see them in here. Blender file, images. Are images not subject to the fake user thing? I thought they were. Maybe these are actually being used so it doesn't show up. Xavier, do you know that offhand? I feel like everything that has the ability to be protected has this little shield. So why don't images? In any sense, that's always like something that we could do programmatically. If you select an image, then we make sure that it's saved. So I'm not too worried about it. So that brings us to, is there a way that we can get, yeah, you don't worry about it too much. I can figure it out later. If you knew offhand, that would be helpful, but if you don't, then I'll look it up later. The sampler here for Bevy has some specific settings. Right, sampler, we need an image sampler descriptor, I think is what we're calling it. Right, this is really what we need on Bevy's side. Using the fake user is not just in the outliner, but it exists in the image editor. Okay, let me check that first then. Ah, there it is. So in that case, yeah, okay, these both have fake users on them. It's really awkward that you have to check that in the image editor, but um, as long as you can put fake user on them, it's even less of an issue. You can scroll the header. What do you mean? Like scroll this? I don't know which part you mean by scroll the header. I don't know what I would be scrolling to. Oh, I've resized it because it's really awkward to see on stream if I don't do this. Right? Like if I do this, I guess it pops over, doesn't it? Because I have a habit of like whenever I'm working in an area, making sure that that is big enough to show on stream. That's what that was. It wasn't access to the header specifically. It was make sure that this thing that I'm working with is like shown. And I think that was just out of habit. I don't even think I thought about doing that. Okay, so we have a question about what this is going to require. These structs haven't changed in ages. That doesn't mean they'll never change. But when we are creating this, we do end up having access to the Bevy version for your specific project. So I think we can just start with having these and then version them later if we need to. And we can version them in the Python source code. So I think that the only thing that will be different is if you're on, let's say theoretically they change in like Bevy 23. If you're using Bevy 22, you'll see these 4 options. If you're using Bevy 23, you'll see 5 options or whatever it changes to. We might even be able to actually just use these directly. Trying to think of if that would be useful or not. I'm trying to think of if we use these directly, right? If I say this is going to be an image sampler descriptor, does that cause problems? You really won't get like the defaults and stuff. But if we're going to go with like Bevy's representation of a sampler, Oh, it's not a critique. It was just something obvious that can be helpful. Of course. Yeah. That's how I took it too. Don't worry about that. I'm not worried about you critiquing me specifically. um, so I have 2 thoughts in my head right now. One is that a GLTF supports a specific subset of this stuff, I think. So let's look at sampler in the spec. Samplers. Samplers have filtering and wrapping. So this would be magnification and minification, both for the actual texture and for the bitmaps. wrapping for the texture coordinates. And they support repeat, mirrored, repeat, and clamp to edge, which Bevy supports repeat, mirrored, repeat, and clamp to edge. So Bevy also has clamp to border, which is interesting. Hey, how's it going? Um, so we could either put the GLTF configurations here, or we can put the Bevy configurations here, or we can do a little bit of both, where we show like the Bevy configurations, and if those are valid GLTF configurations, put that in the file, and if they are not, put it in the extension data. So if you were going to choose clamp to edge, I think that would be like an extension data that overrode the GLTF setting. There's also, so the Bevy GLTF loader. Let me show things when I'm talking about them, I guess. The Bevy GLTF loader. GLTF, source, loader, mod, textures. This is the loading logic for textures. And this happens basically before other things. What am I doing with GLTF? Storing the textures. So GLTF supports exporting textures and images. Textures being samplers and image references. So what Skein does inside of Blender is allow you to take Bevy components. So if you are looking at the Bevy docs and you want to set a fog volume, let's say. Fog volume is a component, which is just like a struct. It's got color, density factor, whatever. It also has this option handle image. So the thing that I'm actually trying to do is convey this handle image in this fog volume as appropriate. And in the course of that, I want to actually support all images, like all handle images for all components for anybody that ever makes one. So the thought process here is basically GLTF already handles exporting textures, but from Blender, it only handles exporting textures if those textures are set up in a material. So our options are basically force everybody to go through the process of creating a material and setting up those textures and configuring the samplers there, or build some extra new UI right where the component is defined to define samplers. There are pros and cons to both. If we force people to go through materials, it's more work for them, but it gives them everything that they would otherwise want from Blender. Like it does everything, right? Now only a subset of those samplers, because I think I have one right now in Blender, these samplers. This is specifically what I'm talking about. If you connect this image texture to a principled BSTF or material output, either one works, then you will end up getting this sampler with these configuration options. And doing that has certain benefits. For example, there's projections in here, and I'm actually not sure if this like exports a cube map or something, or if this is just telling it to be. I should actually look that up. But anyway, there's stuff in here that Blender has set up that works in a certain way, and aligning with that for people who are trying to use it for Bevy is nice, because people who are experienced with Blender then get to use the things they're used to. That said, Bevy does not necessarily support the same options. So we've got clamp to edge, repeat, mirror, repeat, and clamp to border for the ways that you can like repeat a texture if you sample outside of the UV bounds, right? Outside of the texture coordinates. This comes directly from like the WGPU spec. So if we click through here, we end up at the WGPU spec, and it says, it only says 3 of them though. Is it weird that we have one more option here? What is clamp to border? Clamp the value to the border. Yeah, clamp to border, clamp to edge. Clamp the value to the edge of the texture. Clamp the value to the border of the texture. What's the difference between a border and a... Oh, this is a new feature. Okay, got you. This is WGPU has an extra potential feature here. Address mode, clamp to border. Allows the use of address mode clamp to border with a border color other than sampler border color 0. Interesting. I've never used this feature. But that goes, yeah. Images can have borders. Yeah, cool. Bevy only supports flat projection. You think for box projection, you would need a Bevy triplane or projection plugin? It depends what Blender means by what they're saying there. I find it really difficult to navigate the Blender docs, though. This is not what we want, actually. Image texture. We want image texture, but these image textures are actually not the image texture nodes. We want the shader. Oh, fuck. What's it called? Shader node tech image. No. Shader node tech image. This is the actual node. It's not image texture. It's shader node tech image. Borders are useful for kernels. That's interesting. Is there a use case for defining a kernel in Blender? I wonder. I don't know the answer to that. Oh, what Blender calls box texture projection is called triplanar. Okay, that makes sense. You think you figured it out. It's a bit of navigating, and you get used to it. Feel the same way the Rust docs. It was hard for you because you didn't understand the language. Yeah. I think in this particular case, the fact that this sampler setting is only on a shader node, that this shader node does not implement ID, which means you can't reference it from a pointer property, and that there is a thing called an image texture and also another thing called a texture is really confusing, but I assume that's just like legacy software issues, you know? Like Blender has been around for a very long time. It would be really nice if we could just reference this, right? If we could make one of these. But we can't do that with a pointer property. because it doesn't subclass ID, basically. Not legacy. Image textures are 2D, textures are 3D, and can be procedural. Image texture is just a subclass of texture, right? So when I say texture, what I mean is this literal class. I don't necessarily mean like textures in the general sense. I mean this class specifically in this context. So there's a bunch of subclasses of texture, one of which is image texture. Musgrave is like noise, right? But I think that was actually deprecated, so noise texture. So you're saying all of these are 2D? Which feels weird, honestly. Let me... Because you can create 3D noise right here. So it's really weird that... I guess because the output isn't 3D, the output's, 0 to 1 or negative 1 to 1 or whatever this node outputs. Yeah, but you're saying noise textures are 3D and textures in general are 2D, but texture and noise texture and image texture are all like the same thing according to the Python class hierarchy. So the way that you think of a texture in the UI and the way that the texture exists in Python seems to be different. What are you currently looking into? We are doing, so the Bevy game engine is a Rust game engine. It has data that you can put on entities. Thus, what I am doing currently is basically building this little box here. So on this cube, if I'm on the object and I want to insert a Bevy component, I can do that here. This component comes in, and then you can modify the data down here. This is a handle to an image. So I can select an image, which is great. But the thing that we actually need is also a sampler here. So I'm working through basically like, where can we get that sampler information from? Where does that sampler information exist? How does Blender create textures? When we export that, how does it show up in the GLTF file? If we do like just the GLTF level of stuff, then can we support things like clamp to border, like we were just looking at earlier, which are like extra features that are native only, so you have to be like really opting into them, yeah. So right now the thing is we need sampler information here in this UI, which is honestly just something that I've made zero progress on since we started the stream, because I've just been explaining stuff the whole time, which is totally cool. But basically, this is where the sampler data is going to go. The image data is going to go right above it, and then this is going to show up in the UI, right? Like if I just define a random property group here, or I guess like if I just name this like F32, right? Pi.type stuff. What do we call? Int property. So we'll just say this is an int property for now. I will close Blender. Hopefully I didn't break everything here, because that would be fun. So we fetch our data, we get our, test image, which happens to be at the top, sweet. And then this only has image. Did I copy it over? No, I just killed Blender. I didn't copy the data over. That's what happens when I'm on stream. So this Bevy texture then needs to be replaced. We've got a pointer property to an image right now. So I think I'm just going to comment this out and do a Bevy texture here. I think that will be what we want. Playing things a little bit fast and loose for stream. Let's see. Traceback. Pointer property couldn't register because missing BL RNA attribute from meta property group. Oh, I didn't register it. I always forget to do that. We're just gonna throw it in here for now, I think. Technically, we can throw it into this, but I don't think we need to at the moment. Actually, now that I think about it, the way that all the UI code works for all the component data is it looks into that array specifically. So I think we're good here in general, but we use the information that was registered to actually navigate down into this. So if I make this a structured type, I'm probably going to have to do a little bit of shortcutting in the actual rendering code. Basically checking to see if it's a Bevy texture, and if it's a Bevy texture, then handling it in a specific way. So I think we just get to register this for the moment, and I'll clean it up later. And this should probably also, let's pull this over to the Blender. For some reason, Blender really likes to open on my other monitor. So this is obviously no longer a thing that we can access because of the way that the UI code is written. Unrelated to sampler, but GUI UX, the image selector and the image texture node have extra buttons, fake user, create new user, etc. There should be an easy way to use the same GUI block in Skein. Should there be? I guess if we use that same GUI block, then yes. I am considering right now not doing that. It also has the GUI for the sampler, so finding the Python file in Blender source would allow copy paste. Yeah, then I have to trawl through the repo. Which would be shader node tech image. The shader nodes themselves, as far as I'm aware, are mostly implemented in C code. That was another option that I was thinking of. We could also subclass some of the existing nodes, like the shader node, and throw a shader node in, and then just scan for those. But that feels even messier. Node Wrangler. only 17 files here. I can search them all. Blender source is huge, yeah. Blender is mostly C++, but all the GUI is Python. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. This is some socket definitions for searching materials, get material nodes. This is the GLTF exporter. Actually, this is, I think this is actually the code base that I have a PR in for, actually just dumped into the Blender repo. What's it like exporting a project from Blender Bevy? You just hit export. Obviously, I just kind of messed up my component handling here, but I have some other components. So like if I put a player in here, I have some test components and stuff. These are default values that I have set up. So player is on the object. You just hit export GLTF. That's it. In this case, I'm working with extensions quite a bit. So I'll throw it in the same directory that we're working in right now with maybe a new name. I'm going to do GLTF test. We'll call this test. Why not? So you export the GLTF. That exports as a GLTF file. The components are all in here, associated with all the nodes. In this case, it uses extension data. The original version of the extension, or the add-on, I guess, there's too many things called extension in this context. The original version of the Blender add-on used extras, but the forward-looking data is in extensions. So it gets in like this, then there's a file in here that should show how it's used. But it's legitimately like, that's it. You just load the GLTF. Which one do I want to show? Show this one. So this would load the image that we, or not the image, the GLTF that we just exported. This is not related to export. This is like if you wanted to set up like a set of presets. We have preset support. So like here, I can reset this to the default, and the values go back to default. You can add more things to that list by doing this. You set up the plugin. This is a random observer that I have for testing after things spawn, and this is literally like the sum total of how you use it. You just load the GLTF and you spawn it. Like that's it. And then the components are just there. Can BB, I think you mean, so the thing is called Skein. Can it export to .exe? Bevy can compile into an exe, yes. The Blender portion of it just exports GLTFs. So they're just assets that you use in your Bevy project. But if you built this, let's say I was building this on Windows, which I was doing yesterday for a different reason, that builds an exe. Where was I? Properties. So this is a pointer property to this Bevy texture. This Bevy texture then doesn't have the information it needs to render in the UI. The UI is handled in Skein panel. So I have kind of like two options here. If I there's a generic panel renderer down here. There's a couple of things that we need to like override for various reasons. Enums in Rust are handled slightly differently than enums in Blender, so we have some special handling for that. I think this object is going to be that type, but realistically, I think we have to get it. Here, we're only looking at annotations, so I think this is where it breaks down from a UI perspective. Right, so if this is a pointer property, then there's a couple of overrides that I want to get rid of at some point. I'm hoping to make some upstream changes in Bevy so that we can just... Realistically, Skein isn't going to be able to delete that code, but maybe for the next person, they can not have to write it. There's a website for Skein too, if you're like interested in actually looking at like what it does in general. It's bevyskein.dev. Let's see. So if this is a pointer property, this tries to get the key. The pointer property in this case will be at the root because we defined it as a... Let me put this over here. So here we're like, basically at some point we fetch all the registry data from Bevy, which has a full reflection introspection like as JSON that we can just fetch from the application, which tells us about all of the types that you would ever use in your entire Bevy application. We then go through that whole list and create property groups dynamically inside of Blender to represent all that information. This is the function on the left here that is like in the middle of creating all of those property groups and stuff and registering them and doing things like that. So at some point, we're going to end up with a handle, like a Bevy asset handle to a Bevy image. And if we hit that here, then we have a specific override for that. That turns it into a pointer property for a Bevy texture. So there's two things here. The way that we're using this right now is as a tuple. And tuples are handled such that they just have their values as is, which means that I added a random white space there. Which means that this panel, this draw generic panel is where the panel starts. Here's some stuff for the buttons that fetch and whatnot. So if we look in Blender, we're looking at this panel from the top. So it's panel, fetch, insert, components on the object, etc. And then this down here is the like where you modify the data. So here's the insert button that executes operators. Components on this thing. Here's our template list. This is all the components that are on that object or what will become an entity at some point. And then we end up with presets. We can remove the components that is selected if we want to. And then we come to here. And this is Skein property groups type path. we'll look for and find a pointer property. So I'm just going to print type path here as like a simple confirmation that this is actually where I want to be. I believe it is, but one of the things I find difficult about working with Blender generally is that testing this code is kind of tough. I've found that if you doesn't look like that was the right spot, because this would be firing a bunch if it was. Let's move this up one. I found it's really tough to test this code because if you build like a regular test environment, you end up with behavior that is actually different than the way that it behaves in an actual application. So just setting up PyTest or something is not enough. If you are going to test this, you have to actually run a full headless Blender instance and run whatever Python you have inside of that Blender instance, which means that the tests become a little bit less producible, like reproducible. So I think we actually end up here. Which means that this is not a class. It's just that value. Which means that active component data is going to be that pointer property, which we're going to have to check here, I think. It's going to be a pointer property to that thing. Do I need more than the property group here? Do I need to superclass it with ID? Pointer property. It's really funny because I got into like Bevy because I write Rust and I really enjoy writing Rust. And Bevy for other reasons. And then I started this project and now I write Python all the time. So this is a bpy struct with a property and the type inside of it only needs to be a struct, which I think is good. For our UI code, we also have special pointer property handling. In a couple of cases. I think this is really the code that we're going to need to port up. We aren't going to have the annotations here, which is going to be a little weird. I don't think we're going to have the annotations here anyway. I think that's part of the problem that we're currently running into. I tried to write this code in such a way that we could inspect whatever object we get and build the UI off of that. But I think this is the first time we're actually just throwing in a class without having it be like registered. Not registered is the wrong word, but without having it have associated introspection data. So I think these two things are what I want to bring up. Right, so we've got two options here, more or less. This is going to get commented out. I just want to print something here. This does a get on that value. I think this is just what we need. Active component data is the active component, which is the container, if I remember correctly. So the container in this case just tries to render that value. So the data then is stored in the type path here. It's tough to figure out the types of these things a lot of the time, I find. It's one of the things that I think I struggle with the most working in this environment, in the Blender like Python environment, is that it's almost documented as if you're not supposed to know. Yeah, component container. But like all the information is there, right? Like this is a component container class. So the only way that I can really know if this is a component container class or not is if there's API in here and then breaks immediately, right? So this is the printout for that value, which is the component container, which is a test image, which is what we want. So what we actually need, because this might be poorly named too, is we have the type path somewhere here, right? This is not going to have that, so this is going to have to be this, at least. And then we end up with test image here, ID prop, etc. Okay. So that actually gives us, I think, our value. The pointer property check always needs to be wrapped in a try because Python likes to use exceptions for control flow. But yeah, I'm going to grab some water. So I'm going to throw out my BRB screen and I will, as indicated, be right back. Alrighty then. Ooh. Hey Coryar, how's it going? Great to have Saturday code along again. Hope all's well. Yep. I took a little bit of time off for I guess not really for the holidays, but seemed like everybody else was taking time off, so you know, seemed like a good time to take some time off. Okay, so we're building the UI for the sampler for exporting handle images from Blender to Bevy. Off topic, what do you think about Cosmic DE? Like from a user perspective, or from like a Rust crate perspective, or like what's your? I guess you said DE, so you want the desktop environment. I don't have an opinion on the desktop environment because I don't use it. um, the Yeah, like I don't run Linux all that often. I need to actually have a Linux install. Um, because some people that go through workshops and stuff have Linux installs, but I don't currently have one. So I need to set one up again. But yeah, that's like I don't have an opinion because I don't use it. So this is active component data type path. So we end up with a this value. You think it'll be cool because Cosmic uses Rust. Hope one day you can help with the project. Sweet. That's awesome. I hope you find a way to get into that. Open source is a lot of fun. It can be very hectic and stressful in many cases, but finding a project that you kind of align with and like participating in that community and submitting PRs and doing reviews and all that kind of stuff is very rewarding, in my opinion. So we have the thing that we kind of want here. I don't think this is going to be annotations. Because I don't think this is annotated. I think this is going to be something slightly different. But I don't remember the Python incantation for it. Open source is hectic and stressful. At least the pay is good. Yeah. Yup. I think it can be very enjoyable. But it can definitely also be very you can get yourself into maintaining projects if you don't know what you're doing, and if you don't actually want to maintain that project, then it can be tough. Also, it's like it's very, very social too, right? So you have to deal with other people, which is a good thing, and also sometimes a contentious thing, right? Um, even if you only consider the point at which like everything is going well and everything's above board, two people can still have very different opinions on how something should work. And if you have like a group of 3 to 5 people who all kind of disagree in different ways, then it's like you don't just have to have the technical skill, you also have to have the social skill to be able to navigate that and get buy-in and all those things in a way that is just not the same as corporate environments. So like I want to make sure that we are only doing this on certain um I guess technically speaking, type path isn't good enough. We have to check for the actual class. So if this is a pointer property, which I think it has to be a property group. This is one of the other things that I find particularly difficult about working with Blender's Python APIs. There's really no like dict equivalent. Um, you have to use property groups. And if you use property groups, you can't nest them directly. You have to nest them indirectly via a pointer property. And thus it's like just to do like set a key here and get that key becomes significantly more complicated. Python is also not my primary language, so this is like me working in my, I don't know, 5th plus most proficient language. I think Rust and JavaScript are my most proficient. I've been paid to write a number of languages in the past that are not Python, like Go and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, get adder, active component, this type path. So annotations doesn't exist, right? That's what our error is saying here. No, get adder, type path, annotations, ID property group. Okay, so when we're getting this, doing this is the property group then. So theoretically, this would be .image, which obviously like won't work in the general case. But just to check to make sure that we have what we think we have. Really wish, maybe I can set that actually. Maybe I can set that in my window manager. Display on desktop too. See if that works. Hey, I was able to configure it. Okay, fetch, test image, insert, drop out. The error spam is unfortunate here because every frame Blender tries to render this. Like anytime your mouse moves over it, things like that. So it just kind of totally spams. This is not like different, right? This is different. I don't want to dict because I don't want to actually like separate these from their values. Two keys. Not gonna lie, the beauty of open source is freedom. You can build it yourself with whatever features you want. Correct you if you're wrong, you're a noob. I think that that's fine, especially if that's your like. You don't have to have a sophisticated view on open source if you're just getting into it. You can just say, "I like doing this because it allows me to do what I want to do," and that's totally valid. Why did I say keys here instead of items? Because I wasn't paying attention. That's why. I think that open source is a different thing to many different people. And if open source to you is you get to build what you want to because you have ideas that you otherwise can't do in other contexts, that is totally valid. Okay, so this is saying that it only has image, which is another quirk, I think, of Blender. Because this is a texture, this texture has a sampler here, but it doesn't have a default value. No, the default value shouldn't matter. Do I have this as props or types? Props. Props is what it's supposed to be. Do these have commas at the end? No. The other annoying part is like, this is all written in some old form of Python, so I have to throw type ignore on the end of these classes all the time, anytime I define a new property group. So we have image and then there's sampler, but sampler doesn't show up in our loop, which feels weird. Right? Here's our initial log. Here is the type that we have. Here's the value of that type. Here is the field on the value of that type. But there should be a sampler here as well. You can right click in the GUI and hit edit source. So like this, which I assume doesn't work because I am edit source. I assume this is just in the editor and I have to now go to the scripting panel. Nope. Ah, there you go. Now, my question is, does this save out permanently or does this save out temporarily? If I save this out, is it going to save to some like overrides directory such that when I reopen Blender that it like reapplies overrides? Or is it saving out over that one file? Okay, it's saving out over the one file. I don't think that really helps me much. I guess it does. I find the Blender editor to be really awkward to work in. Like I don't get everything does something different than what I expected to do. That was Control A. which should go to the beginning of the line and is select all. You say sometimes it helps, but it does not work for the image texture node. Oh, you mean to like find the UI there? I'm not really trying to find the UI at the moment. I'm trying to find the... It's weird to me that this class has image and sampler, right? One of them is a pointer property, one of them is an int property. And when we iterate over these, the image is the only one that exists. And I need both. Yeah, same. You mostly use it to point to a line file and open it in NVim. Yeah, that makes sense. And I've run into this kind of issue before with Blender's Python types, where these effectively like don't get initialized. I've written code to like go through the tree of stuff and initialize these values because I want to work with them, but they apparently don't exist unless you touch them first, which is really unfortunate. So this items on the property group doesn't like work for me. Which means that I need to find a different way to get the keys that should be here. On the bright side, that means that these two things should be true, right? Right, we should be able to log out image and sampler here because those are items with those keys. I also like the way that Python uses different braces for different kinds of access. Trips me up a lot. Yeah, so this doesn't have image, but that doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily exist because it could be get adder. I forget what Python calls these. They are like attributes and something else. So still expecting to see the error because even if the first one doesn't exist, the second one shouldn't. So the dot and the get adder should be the same thing. So then these should be like this. And I think this does a different kind of access. Key not in subgroup dict sampler. So sampler doesn't exist for some reason on this property group. And I really fundamentally do not understand why. We can get the image, but we can't get the sampler. The sampler should just be a U32, right? Register class, sampler. This is a pointer property to that. But it doesn't exist. And I'm not really sure what to do about that at the moment. We'll figure it out though. I must be doing this somewhere because I do use other property groups. I would love if there was some kind of like initialize function here. But I don't think there really is. I did at one point have a function for this because I needed it for, let's see, where's insert? I needed it for doing testing in PyTest when I was trying to do PyTest based testing. Before I realized that you actually get different behaviors between like a regular Python environment and the Blender environment itself. And this is one of the behaviors that is different, whether the values actually initialize or not. So I've got this touch all fields function that tries to do a get attr, which will fail on the image. In this context. So this won't work, actually. And if I remember correctly, annotations already failed for us. So this is kind of unfortunate in that sense, because now we're left with kind of a, let's see, Skein panel is where I needed to be. I need this to be items here. So sampler fails, right? Why does sampler fail? I don't know. Is sampler actually different than image and needs to be get attr instead of being this kind of access? I think this would be really unfortunate. Doesn't look like that's true, which is good. But why does this object not have sampler, even though I defined it as having sampler? I guess, am I not unregistering the old one right now? And is it just like, is that tripping me up? No, I've entirely broken the loading by doing that. This is this is not a me problem. This is some other extension that has a Python int that can't become a cint. This is Skein. At least it gives me a line number to go look at. Missing BLRNA attribute from instance may not be registered. How would that not be registered? I guess theoretically, if this file didn't run. So let's just property groups. This will be in init, I guess. Do we have a property groups, component data, and Bevy texture? And then right next to component data, we will do the same thing for Bevy texture in both places, just to make sure. The next thing I'm going to do is add a new field and see if it changes. Is it well registered? What do you mean by well registered? Do you think overall effort for a game jumps a lot from 2D or Diablo 2 to full 3D? I think if you're building literally Diablo 2, the effort is already extremely high. I think if you're building any kind of like full production game that is that large, your effort is already huge. Like Diablo 2 is not made by a small team. So contextually, I would say it probably takes a bit of effort to go from Flappy Bird or Block Breaker to 3D. Some people have trouble like moving from 2D to 3D because 3D requires now like quaternions instead of angles, right? So there's a couple of things that are like little stepping stones to hurdle over. Also, the art style is different. So if you are capable of drawing 2D images, that doesn't mean you're good at 3D modeling. So they're different skills, right? Texturing, of course, will reuse your 2D skills. But for the most part, I'd just classify them as like somewhat different skills rather than being like a difficulty jump. I think there is like some level of difficulty in the like the amount of stuff goes up, right? You're adding a dimension. So instead of like a square on the screen, you have a cube on the screen. If you have like a projection of like a little thing that's going to go in an arc and land somewhere, doing that in 2D is like just a parabola, right? But doing that in 3D is like, where's the camera? How do you need to show it? Does it come from the camera or the player? Does it like you have 3 dimensions to worry about for that parabola? If you're trying to pick a spot on the ground for it to land and have cost associated with that, like you have fewer variables in 2D than 3D. So I still wouldn't say it's necessarily like a difficulty jump. It is just a different skill set in many ways. Yeah, I think that's how I'd frame it. Because you can still do a lot of the same things, right? And you can actually build a 3D game in a 2D style too, right? Like you can use 3D elements, but do it with like a two-dimensional, like a fighting game. Not specifically a fighting game, I don't mean, but like just the visuals of like it's 3D, but really all the movement is in 2D. You're friends with you have a friend with an idea for a 2D mobile game, and you're like, please let's change to HD 2D. Yeah, for mobile is like you're resource constrained. I think one of the reasons that, if I remember correctly, Hades ran well on the Switch is because Hades is like tons and tons of 2D sprites that were rendered out from 3D rather than being the 3D models themselves. So they're like resource constraints. And if you're shipping on constrained devices, rendering a quad is going to be easier than rendering a cube. But they still ship Zelda on the Switch, etc. So like, maybe you're not going to ship Crisis on a phone, but I think it really depends in general. Good take. You've never built a game, but might attempt this year. Nice. What kind of game do you want to build? I guess that's is that related to your question? Like, were you considering whether you should do 2D or 3D? This is like pure free question time right now as I struggle with how to get a field from a Python object. So if anybody else has questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat. Why doesn't this have sampler? Let's try a new field. Let's try a new field called test field. And let's name that field test. And we'll try it with an integer, and then we'll try it with a pointer property, and we'll see if it's just the integer that doesn't get. Has no object test, only has image. And if we do this and we say, okay, test is now going to be literally just another image. That's it, just another image. Then this pointer property should exist. If my guess here is correct. No attribute test. Okay, so now there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with the state of my code in Blender. Unless there's something weird about the way that I'm reaching in here. Oh, you know what? Actually, this needs to be that, right? I told you, like, accessing these attributes trips me up all the time. And I think it just trips me up again. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it's relevant. You were leaning on 2D-esque. You don't know what you're talking about, though. You like Diablo 2D's style. Diablo 2D is... isometric? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of art that goes into, like, Diablo. And there's also a lot of work, right? Oh, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to look at the image, not whatever post that was. Like, even just looking at this image, you're talking about you've got a player, you've got point and click. It's got to navigate to wherever you click. That could be a straight line to start, but I'm sure Diablo has a more sophisticated pathfinding algorithm for that. This has NPCs walking around back and forth. This has UI that I assume is health and mana on either side with a bunch of like inventory level stuff. So you need to be able to like drop things, pick things up. There's probably a shop at some point, et cetera, et cetera. And like there's also dialogue on screen. So you need like some way to be able to interact with the NPCs as well. And like even just the things that I've just listed is a lot of work. So the caution that I would give is scope the project way down and make it as small as you can, especially if it's your first game. Don't be like, I'm going to build Diablo 2. Instead, be like, I'm going to build this piece of Diablo 2. And then I'm going to build that piece of Diablo 2. And I'm going to build that piece of Diablo 2. Thus, you can get like an actual like small piece of it built and done, and then feel some success from that, get another small piece of it done, etc. Don't be like, I'm going to build Diablo 2. Be like, I'm going to build, I don't know, the Diablo 2 dialogue system, or the Diablo 2 like NPC that walks around, or the point and click functionality from Diablo. Like pick one of those and start like building up from there. Or even just the rendering the environment and stuff, right? Could be a task in its own. Okay, so pointer property, test, sampler. Let's name this like test and see if the 0 comes up. I'm going to assume no. I don't think this is going to work. So primitives don't show up. um, I don't know what the answer to that is. Is there a way to set a default value for, what is it, int property? I thought it was default, but maybe that is just wrong. Soft min, soft max, step, override, subtype update. Is there no default value? Oh, there's default equals 0. Why is default not in the parameters? A star pathfinding, you assume. Yeah, could be. I don't actually know. I didn't play a lot of Diablo myself. Don't go from 0 to 100, go from 0 to 10 and move up. Yeah, I mean, I would say that if it's your first game ever, like just scope way down, figure something out that you can then accomplish, and then move on to the next thing. And that can be like you can chunk up into the full game. Like you don't have to like get rid of the idea of like building a Diablo 2 clone or whatever, but don't set build the entire game as your goal. Set build one of the systems as your goal. You hope one day Bevy manages to create an editor like Godot and publish it in app stores to make the engine easier to use like Godot does. You think it'd be easier to get more users, or maybe you're wrong. If they did it like Godot does with an app interface editor and avoid external terminals IDE as much as possible, you don't know. I think that there's, I'm not going to call it two user bases, but there are people who really appreciate Bevy for its ability to be programmed as it is today, which is a very valuable thing because in many respects, the projects that have these editors are opaque in a way that is not helpful, is the way that I would put it. For example, in Bevy right now, we're talking about samplers today and stuff like that. Like there's a type for a sampler. If I wanted to create a sampler, I would just create an instance of the sampler type or like the image sampler descriptor or whatever and put it in the place that it needs to go and it would be done. And there's a lot of benefits from being able to see everything that's going on that get erased with an editor. So if you look at Godot and whatnot, I don't want to pick on any particular engine, but they're all kind of the same in this respect, at least. So if we just go for like the Godot editor, for example, let's look at this one. Nope, that's way too small. Can we just like, I guess this is the Godot docs, so that'll be good enough. Maybe an old version. What's latest stable? Get us latest stable. Why not? But I want the editor. Okay, let's just look at this image. This image is fine. Editors are great, but they hide a lot of information as well. But would doing that be outside the Bevy philosophy? So I'm going to get to that. Building an editor makes Bevy accessible to a whole different like set of people. So it's a good thing. It is a thing that Bevy wants to do and is working on. It is a thing that generally the community agrees upon would be good. For me, the part that I hesitate on, which is not having an editor at all, it's just if functionality starts to get tied to needing to use the editor, that's when I kind of balk a little bit. I don't want to have to open the editor to do a build of my project. I don't want to have to open the editor to build maps. I don't know, etc. Right? But that said, editors like open Bevy up to like an entire class of user who doesn't necessarily feel comfortable in a terminal, like you were saying, feel comfortable writing code in like a dedicated editor, might not even have like a dedicated editor installed. They might not be programmers, right? So editors like this are really useful in that respect. And Bevy will get one eventually, I think. I think there's enough people that like consider that important, and enough people that want to work on that will happen. Bevy's modularity is a great feature. Just use what you need. Yes, agreed. A lot of people want to learn Rust too, and a good way is to make games. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Clutch Pile says, I don't know if accessibility should be that high on the priority. Accessibility in what sense? I'll give you a chance to like... I think that accessibility in the sense of like people being able to actually use the interface should definitely be high on the priority list. If you're talking about accessibility in the sense of like expanding to more groups of users, I think that you can generally argue it either way. I think expanding to more users is generally a good direction to go in. Having editor which isn't good can harm more than having none. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. I think if you have an editor and it's bad for some reason, then it exists and can be improved. If you don't have an editor, there's nothing really to work on except to build one from scratch, which a lot of people have trouble building things from scratch, from blank pages and stuff like that, but would contribute to something that already existed and didn't work the way they needed it to. So I don't know that I agree that having like an editor that wasn't good is worse than having none. I don't know that I agree with that. Getting out to as many users as possible is what you meant by accessibility. I think that for Bevy to exist long term, it has to have more users. Right? Like there has to be more people building production games and shipping production games, and that comes with having a wider user base. So I think that it has to happen. I will agree with you in the sense that like Bevy doesn't need to be a monopoly, right? It doesn't need to take VC funding and try to capture the game development market or whatever, I don't know, whatever people would say. Bevy doesn't need to do that. Godot and Bevy can exist together for the next 30 years. They can both exist. They can both address slightly different markets, et cetera, and they can both be good for the next 30 years. And Godot doesn't need to kill Bevy, and Bevy doesn't need to kill Godot. I think Unreal and Unity have a slightly different bent on that because they are like more funded and things like that. But yeah. Right? Like if you are a company that takes VC funding, you are opting into a very specific kind of path. And that path is kind of like go get a monopoly on whatever you are trying to do. Bevy doesn't have VC funding. Godot also doesn't, as far as I'm aware. I I won't mention any other projects. But like Bevy and Godot are well set to like exist for the next 30 years and do so in harmony and not have to like shoot daggers at each other ever, which I really appreciate. I think that having multiple good open source engines is a good thing. And there will be an editor. Bevy will have an editor. And I think that Bevy Bevy having an editor and expanding to that group of people is not the same thing as trying to like appeal to everyone, right? I think there are plenty of people who want to get into game development that need that kind of editor to as like a foothold to be able to do so. I think also editors can obviously have other positive impacts too, and you can't forget the other end of it either. Like we've talked a lot about editors as like a newer user onboarding, but there's also editors as like specialized tools, right? If you build something and you take pieces of Bevy's editor and you use that to build a specialized, I don't know, meshlet visualization tool for your game, that's the other end of it too, right? So Bevy having an editor means that all of these other little components that you would need to do that get built. So I think overall an editor would be a good thing. What is not a good thing is that this int property is not, it doesn't exist. No idea why this doesn't exist. Right? I don't know. Maybe I clone what I have over here just as like a backup. Um, Skein is one level of editor, right? It's like a thing that could be considered an editor. Blender, as you're doing your level design or whatever, or building models, etc. Blender is an editor, right? So as somebody who quote unquote works on editors, which is literally what I'm doing this stream, literally I can't say that that is a bad thing, right? It doesn't make sense that that would be bad. Now, I don't think the Bevy editor needs to compete with Blender, right? I don't think that that's necessary. Why does that not exist? Let's go to insert component. This is doing touch all fields, and this is probably failing to touch the test field. I think this touch all fields gets called anytime we insert a new component. And this relies on, I believe, some of the reflection data here. I guess the other thing we have here is component data, right? So where else do we use component data? I think that's in fetch registry. Which would just be in make properties then. So this has type, path, and name. This creates new Python classes that subclass that component group and then adds annotations. So anytime we access type path on this component data, which would be in Skein panel, and this would be dot type path. Which I guess we never access. Hang on, let me RG type path. That's rip grep. Rip grep is super useful. And let's look for... It's probably going to be in the export stuff. Or when we're selecting the type path. Select a type path. Yeah, here we do that in registry loading. I don't know why I didn't find it earlier in registry loading. Maybe I had typoed. So when we are building these, we grab the registry, which is the reflection information as JSON effectively, and we grab the type path and stuff. And here we're setting the type path of that component value to type path. And it somewhat occurs to me that, let me do this. Let me see if this breaks. I'm going to remove that. It somewhat occurs to me that Python would let me do whatever I wanted and not tell me that I was doing something wrong there. So I think over time, this has effectively turned into something that we're not using that field. Let's do this. I wish the buttons here were a little bit easier to avoid. Let's see. Test. I'm just going to call it test2. That's what it's going to be. I'm going to export both data sets, and we're going to look at test2.gltf. So we don't use that at all. And it's also not an error to set it here, as far as I can tell, which is kind of wild. So that means that I'm not actually accessing that value there. And that I am, I guess, just arbitrarily setting something that I don't use, which Python totally lets me do and doesn't warn me about at all. So my question becomes, how the hell are we doing this at all? Right? If we have a thing that is a kind, we make property with a type name, this returns int properties at some point. But they are accessible through the annotations. So why does pointer property get initialized and scalars don't? Yada, yada, yada. This person says, that's not what I want. I don't want to override this, but let's test it. to see if it affects what we're doing here. So that should just be a new log when we try to get the value that allegedly doesn't exist. Remote, test image, insert, yada yada. I guess, are we calling get adder with the square bracket? I don't actually know. I think that might be the other one. Just to check why sampler does not exist, is the parent object you try to access the sampler attribute the right type? What do you mean by is it the right type? I will say that what we did was we replaced this with a clone of a pointer property, and the pointer property existed, and we could access the pointer property. So it's just these scalars for some reason that aren't getting initialized. And what I really don't know how to do is, I guess, introspect this type. For its fields. This is not the right documentation. dir would be good to actually debug, though. And I forgot about inspect. So those are the two things that I want to check next. So we're going to take this, and we are going to print dir, which should do like a recursive print effectively of the Python object. And then the next thing I'm going to do after that is inspect. I forget what to call on this. There's so many things here. Check the, this is get members. I don't know what members is necessarily. Inspect. Get members retrieves members of an object. The functions whose names begin with is are mainly provided as convenient choices. This would be inspect annotations, I think, is what we would be looking for. I think I have one of those actually in the code base. I mean, I use it for that. Here's what I would use it for. So I'm going to print both of those things and just see what they are at that position in the code. Test image, insert. And did I forget to remove image? No. Image isn't there? Why is an image not there? Okay, now I'm very confused. This is the life of writing Python in Blender today. Okay, so here's our inspect get annotations fails. Not a module, class, or callable. Cool. And we don't see it in dir. So let's take a sneak up at the next level up just to confirm. And this gives us, this is the component container. So basically, because Blender doesn't have good support for defining a bunch of different types or like enums effectively, what we end up with is one type that has a ton of fields that are all named the type path of the component from Bevy. So that's what this is. This is the component container is what we call it in the code. The component container is in a file somewhere. Where's component container? This is defined in registry loading. Component container is like this dynamically constructed class, effectively. So it's subclasses property group, and all of the type paths that we could choose to choose a component are basically stuck into these annotations, and the values of those are the component values. And this takes advantage of the fact that Blender won't initialize any of the data if we never look at it or use it. And also the fact that we have all of the type annotation data, all the introspected field data, to be able to look into this object for only the fields that we actually want. So the things don't get initialized, so it's not really creating extra space. And also, when we do initialize fields, we know what to look for beforehand. So that is the active component data, which is probably a bad name for that. This is the container component. So maybe I rename that here. Selected container component sounds better. Is this VS Code? It is. It's VS Code because pointing and clicking works better for stream. Changing things, changing things in different places off screen with like an Emacs, like clack, clack, clack on the keyboard doesn't help a lot for stream and for videos and stuff. You're saying test image and Bevy texture still look like different types to you, even though your explanation of being able to access the member of switching from an int to a string fixed the issue. They are not supposed to be the same type. Bevy texture and test image are not supposed to be the same type. The thing that's happening here, to put it concretely, that container component that I just talked about, right? I think we have the log over here that I can still show. So this container component with all of the field names that are basically the type paths to the Bevy components, that is where test image lives. Specifically because test image is a tuple struct that contains a handle to an image, right? So what happens is that the key here is an API test image. That's the key name.
and the value is just whatever we replaced the handle image with. So in that case, it is the Bevy texture. So we've got, this doesn't need to be a pointer property, right? Hang on, let me check. I don't think it needs to be. So we've got the component container. The key name is the API test image, and the value type is Bevy texture. So we have a Bevy texture when we are here. This is a Bevy texture, which I think I can prove. It's not instance of. If is instance selected component Bevy texture, which I then need to also import. Print is Bevy texture. Right, and I'll get rid of the thing that breaks because. So if we open Blender, we run through the process, we fetch a remote repository, we insert a test image. This is rendering basically every time I hover over that. So like every time my mouse moves over this re-renders. So I can get rid of this now, and we can look at component container test image. This is OB cube, and then we have, I guess that isn't a test image, or that isn't a Bevy texture. So what is that if it's not a Bevy texture? We're printing it here, and that prints as a bpy ID prop owned by the cube with a name of API test image. Okay, then you think selected container type path is not of the Bevy texture Python type. Print type stuff. Okay. It's nice having people who like know Python in chat. Print type stuff. I'm going to add another log here. I don't know what type this would be if it wasn't a Bevy texture. Right, it's just an ID property group. ID property group sounds wrong. ID property group sounds like not the thing that I need. That sounds like I do not know nor really like Python. Yeah, that's fair. Why is this an ID property group? Hold, please, while I... Okay, so when we do make property for the incoming types, right? We've got a type path and a value. This is top level make property. This is taking the reflection JSON data from Bevy and turning it into property groups. That's what make property is doing. So this becomes a property group or just a like an int property or something like that. We've got type path and value and short path and all of our options. And we set that up to be a pointer property. I think this is my problem. I think this actually needs to be returned as a, I think it is being returned as a pointer property, actually, now that I think about it. Because this is just getting returned directly. So this would be, where's type path? Type path. Test image, we'll say. Oh, this is testing to see if it has annotations. If it doesn't have annotations, it doesn't set up the pointer property. And this fails for that type. So I think actually this is going to be correct. This actually whole thing. Just try this for a second too. So if we remove that pointer property, then we can get the annotations attribute. And we are logging nothing out. Whereas here is Bevy texture. A lot of logs that say here. This breaks before those logs. Trying to look for the annotations in the index rendering. Sounds like a reference to the stuff we want. Yeah, I don't. With none of this being typed, it's really tough to introduce new new functionality in the way that I'm doing right now. Because basically this is like just a property group, right? With no annotations because it doesn't need them. And we don't have anything that has been defined without annotations. So I think that what that leads me to think is instead of doing it like this, I do it like we do an object. And The way we do it for an object is by setting the key values to those pointer properties or setting them to the properties. So if I go back to Bevy texture and I construct this dynamically, which I do over in registry loading, like this. And this is called Bevy texture now. And this is a property group, which we are dynamically constructing through annotations. And instead of this is going to be Bevy texture. Just by curiosity, annotation are the type annotations. Annotations are a Python thing. I don't think that they're necessarily type annotations. They are not the new like typing that Python has grown over the years. I don't know that I have the vocabulary to accurately explain what annotations actually are. But the TLDR is that through a bunch of trial and error and a bunch of practice and a bunch of research, what I figured out is that uh, Blender requires us to register types. We have to create those types at runtime after we fetch the registry. Because we have to create those types at runtime after we fetch the registry, annotations is the way to do that, such that when that class is constructed, it gets the fields that you expect it to have. So by using the type, like we were using type for a log earlier, I'm using type here to actually construct a new class with a property group superclass and fields that are defined by annotations effectively. So they aren't type annotations. They are something else that is like a Pythonism. But I don't know that I really understand it at a deep level enough to really explain it. This again is like not my not my primary or secondary language, or even really a tertiary or fourth or fifth. It's like it's really down there for me. So when you see me doing this, it is working with a language that I do not know well. Whereas when I work with Rust or something, I can usually explain pretty much everything. Um, Python, I'm not creating a Python workshop anytime soon. I might make a video on making Blender add-ons. I think I have some information there that could be useful, but I am not a Python expert. So we have image, which is going to be a pointer property. It's going to be this. And we have sampler, which I'm going to make an int property for the moment. And then we're going to create Bevy texture. We are going to register Bevy texture. This becomes a little bit harder to unregister. I think I have a different way of unregistering this. But I think that that's our path forward. I now have a bunch of code that is dedicated to doing it the other way. So TBD, but get adder object annotations, none type object, because this needs to be a pointer property. And I set it up as I think this is what I need to return. Which should send it through this, which should set it up as a pointer property. So this is coming from render 2. And 442. We do need to cut this off, I think, early. Because we're going to want to set specific UI for this. I'm going to set some prints here. Is class. Not class. We're no longer in not class. We never reached this code. I don't think that we are going to ever reach this code if we write the code like this. Scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. Pre-class is class. So it is a class. So we're getting into a different code path. It is if the type path is not in the selected container component, then it has no data edit. This is like marker components, effectively. Marker components don't end up in this group of stuff. So we end up in render 2. So the question is, when we get to render 2 here, we are erroring on line 424, which is basically past everything. Let's print next type here. I feel like it's relevant that like the reason I'm doing this is to make the workflow simpler. Because technically speaking, it would have worked if we had just made everybody go through the next type is none. Next type being none is weird. right? Like we could have stopped and just said everybody has to set up everything inside of materials. You have to use the Blender UI to do so, et cetera, et cetera. But that comes with too many drawbacks from a UX perspective for me. Right, none type. Okay, so bpy struct bevy texture image. Image's next type is none. That feels weird, right? So if we get at her here on image, image is a pointer property currently. Maybe this issue is due to having sampler in the annotations we create, but not in the class of this type. It was replaced with a dummy. But yeah, we aren't inheriting from that type anymore, that original type. I don't think that's the issue because, for example, all of these types are dynamically constructed as well. So actually, the only reason that I left Bevy texture up here is because it's being registered in the other file and I didn't want to go remove it yet. But in our new code, we are only using the dynamically constructed Bevy texture type. So object, this sets pointer properties, right? Yes. If this is a class, then we set a pointer property. We need this to be a pointer property to an image for the UI to show to select an image. I don't think we can just say this is an image. Library overridable is necessary for people using asset libraries, which pretty much nobody does because it's pretty complicated to set up and use. But I try to keep the support for it. So this is object. This is the enums. This is not actually what I want. Struct is actually what I wanted. So for key and properties, this is the like JSON data for the component. We make a property for that thing. If it's a class, we set it as a pointer property. If not, we don't. So this all looks correct to me in the same way that it was before. I think maybe the only thing is that this is bpy.types.image. This feels really weird, but oh, that just broke. So definitely not supposed to be putting props there. I didn't think we were supposed to be putting props there, but pointer properties, I believe, always have to point to the actual type. And we really aren't doing this anywhere else right now. I guess this is a pointer property to this property, but this property is the actual class. It is not. If it's a primitive, it goes here. So let's get this back in. I'm hoping to have this in for the Bevy Jam, is really why I'm doing this now. I want people to be able to set up things like fog volumes and whatnot and do light baking for the Bevy Jam, because light baking just makes everything look so significantly better. And Blender is capable of doing it. Other solutions in the Bevy ecosystem that use Blender for light baking rely on the structure of the blend file, which is a really terrible idea because that is explicitly something that the Blender developers tell you to not rely on because it's not stable as a format. If I struct, texture, image, next type, none. Why is next type none? I feel like if next type was anything, it would be fine. But why is next type none? Let me, hmm. So it knows this is a pointer property, right? Is the pointer property not getting initialized? Is that why? I definitely feel like because Python doesn't have like types and stuff, that I find myself doing a lot of this like throw a log here, throw a log there, throw a log here kind of debugging. Failed to init fields. So the question is why? What is it? Exception as E. So let's print the exception here. I wish I could have the UI panel like only go once. Let's see. So we get test image, we get down to image. None type object has no attribute annotations. This is a none type for some reason. Question is why? Right? Annotations image is a pointer property. What other pointer properties do we initialize here? Nothing there, nothing there. These are all props dot, right? Yep, props dot. Let's go look at the struct code again. What's funny is that I wrote all this code. And many months later, I still have to go back and be like, what does the struct do? So we make the property. If it's a class, we set it to be a pointer property. Which I think is basically saying any property group gets a pointer property and anything else gets a regular property. But that seems very straightforward. Right? And then type T component data and an object. And this is type Bevy texture property group. Let's change the name of this for a second just to do a sanity check. Make sure that I'm not like using stale state and stale code. I don't think I am, but always good to be sure. Yeah, Bevy textured with an image. Why is image a none type? Has no attribute annotations. Has no attribute annotations? That feels weird. Which VS Code theme is that? That is Night Owl. Night Owl is what I use for everything. Nope, that's not it. Need to bump up the Sarah's Night Owl SEO. This is Night Owl. Night Owl comes in a whole bunch of different themes for different programs and stuff. It is not just a... There we go. It is not just a VS Code theme. It has a bunch of other installations at this point. So iTerm, Emacs, Vim, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You found it on Zed? Nice. Yeah, it's a solid theme. It's really good. She did a really good job on it. I've been using it for 6 or 7 years at this point. Something like that. Something really long. Okay, so the question I have is why does this work for everything else except for the thing that I need it to right now? Annotations, maybe hash type path is a pointer property. Yeah, annotations is an object, right? So this is our annotations with keys and values, and the values are pointer property. Let's get rid of image for a second. So here's sampler. So now our issue is reversed, basically. Our issue is with the pointer property and not the actual value. I think this is an improvement, actually. over where we were before. I think the pointer property just needs to be initialized. And just as a sanity check, I'm going to throw that in and check it. I'm expecting this to break. And if it doesn't, I will be surprised. Yes. So what's the issue with pointer property? Why is it none? Right? We get this. We get to the point at which we're trying to do it. This tries to do a get adder. Is that wrong for some reason? Let's see where this fails. Starting to go a little loopy from the number of times I've reopened Blender today. Touch all fields. Pre-get out or pre-annotations loop. We get an item, which is an image, which is a property deferred. Can't remember if that's the correct thing to see or not. I feel like it's not. Built-in function pointer property points to an image. Pre-get at or pre-annotations. Oh, is this saying that image doesn't have annotations? Shoot. So the issue is that this is actually a built-in type. It doesn't have annotations and thus shrug. Which is bad for us because we now need to handle that in both the rendering and the initialization. So that's why we're getting the issue. Where's our rendering? Skein panel, please. Skein panel. That's why we're getting an issue here, because that's literally an actual thing. But that's a none type. Why is it a none type? That's what I think is confusing me at the moment. Because the error is actually that it gets all the way to the right place, we get to Bevy textured, which is the image. Or we get to Bevy textured with the image field, at which point we have to get that attribute. When we get that attribute doesn't exist. I feel like this is a fix for the insert. So this starts out as none. I think none is a valid value for image because you could not have an image selected. It's not one that I use anywhere else. Um, let's just do this then. If it's none, render it or try to render it. Feels really weird. But I think I think what actually happens here is that the pointer property is like invisible to us when we're doing a get attr, and then it actually is used by the actual rendering logic. So I think this is gonna work. I'm gonna leave myself a note here. I'm gonna mix my Rust and my Python. And then Blenda, remote, test image, insert. And we probably have to also handle this somewhere else. And this is 239. We now have to account for the fact that there are valid values that don't have the annotations on them. Actually, this is just layout.prop, right? This isn't render too. We shouldn't be sending this all the way back through the same cycle because it's already the value that we need to render. And there we go. Now, once you select an image, it breaks again. But but that's something that I can fix. We've got sampler. We've got image. When you select an image, that sends it down a different code path. So maybe what I do here instead is, instead of checking for none, Instead of checking for none, can I check for an instance of this class? I think we can do both, right? Pi types image, explicit handling here, and then we do the same thing. Select an image. This is correct now, and now we have a second image, which is unfortunate. I think that I actually have to, if is instance layout prop, else, elif, elif. Thus, we don't get our, I guess, I don't know if that can be turned into a match case, actually, because it uses different values. Okay, that, perfect. This is it. This is the fix. Assuming I didn't break anything else, this is the behavior that we are going to see for images. In Blender, you are going to be able to select an image, and then I'm going to have some more data here that is going to be, I haven't decided quite yet. I think because this is going to be custom UI, we go straight to the Bevy representation. And thus the handling of this is going to be with the GLTF data and some extension data. I think that's what I'm going to do, because I think that this is conceptually something that doesn't exist anywhere else. It doesn't have any impact on anything else inside of Blender. It is exclusively a Bevy sampler. So this is going to be basically an image sampler descriptor, which means that we should fill it in with all of the data that is relevant. And when I do that, what I can do is fill in the pieces that fit into GLTF when we're exporting, which are the, the wrap and whatever, and then fill in any extra data in the extensions field for that texture. Thus, the textures will be pulled in correctly, and also churned into the right samplers. I think that's all true. I think there's some things in there about, like, once this is all working, there's some efficiency things we can do. If you have the same image referenced in multiple places with the same sampler, that can probably be all the same. But I think if you have an image with a different sampler, you don't get that benefit. It has to be different. Right. So we end up with images that vec of U8s effectively. So it's like literally the image data, and then the image sampler. So if you want a different sampler on an image, mind you, not a not a, how do I frame this? I'm not going to frame this. Okay. If you want a different sampler associated with the same bytes, you can't do that currently. So we can then probably specify all of this stuff. if we want to. I think all of these things are valid values. Texture usages is a bit flag, so we'll probably have to do custom UI for that. Right, another enum, et cetera, et cetera. So this will just be a thing that will be a type probably that we manually ship with the Skein Blender add-on. We could do this, I think, automatically. And I could just say that this is going to be like an image sampler. I think everything in here would be renderable. Render asset usages and the other one are bit flags, and those are hard to write manually. Texture view descriptor doesn't have anything that would be weird. The only thing that's weird here is that this is a static string slice. Formats, fine, enum. Texture descriptor doesn't have anything, has a label. Sampler is a sampler descriptor. I think we might just do this sampler descriptor in the UI here. We could do more theoretically. I don't know if people will want more, but I'll think through the use cases a little bit. Because we do basically have to pass this sampler through the GLTF. And while image today in Bevy is like a unified thing, I don't know if that's always going to be true. So overfitting, shrug. I think it would be fun to be able to specify the render asset usages and stuff. But yeah, I think with it working, what time is it? 11:30? Yeah, okay. I think that's going to be it for today. Hey guys, I'm learning Rust and I want to try a small Bevy project in this year. Go Rust, go Bevy. Nice. I have a video on the channel right now if you want to do it. It's Flappy Bird, meant for beginners, small Bevy project. Teaches a bunch of stuff before the Bevy Jam. So if you just click on the channel, wherever I don't know where that button is, scroll the page or something. But yeah, Flappy Bird is there. And then I think that's going to be it for the stream for today. I will see y'all in the next one. Thanks for hanging out. Yeah, later.